It's the summer of 1876, and the United States is in the mood to finish what it started. The country has been celebrating its 100th birthday with parades, patriotic speeches, and all the self-congratulation a young empire can muster. The telegraph wires are buzzing with optimism. Railroads are crisscrossing the continent. The frontier is tamed, or so they think. And out west, a man with long blonde hair and an ego to match is saddling up for one last war. His name? George Armstrong Custer. Civil War hero, media darling, the so-called boy general. He's 36 years old and still chasing glory like it's 1863. Washington sends him and his 7th Cavalry out to Montana Territory to deal with a problem named Sitting Bull, a Lakota spiritual leader who refuses to play along with U.S. land deals and reservation policies. Officially, Custer's mission is to pacify hostiles. Unofficially, it's to make a show of force, and maybe strike it rich in the Black Hills while he's at it. On June 25th, Custer rides up a hill near the Little Bighorn River, peers down into a wide green valley, and sees smoke curling from what looks like a massive encampment. There are more teepees than expected, way more. But Custer doesn't pause. He doesn't blink. He turns to his men, flashes that signature grin, lifts his hat, and bellows, "Hurrah, boys! We've got them!" He did not, in fact, have them. 1 hour later, nearly every man under his immediate command is dead. The Battle of the Little Bighorn becomes one of the greatest military debacles in U.S. history. No survivors from Custer's 5 companies, no reinforcements, no cavalry charge at the last second to save the day. Just a lonely, bloody hillside, and a silence that would echo all the way back to Washington. So how did it go so catastrophically wrong? And how did a man once called the hope of the Union Army end up as a cautionary tale? To answer that, we have to rewind, back to the boy, the battlefield, and the blazing ambition. George Custer was born in New Rumley, Ohio, a rural town that rarely gets mentioned unless someone's talking about him. The son of a blacksmith, he had grit, swagger, and a dangerous amount of charm. He was sharp, too, just not in the way West Point appreciated. He enrolled in 1857 and immediately became a disciplinary nightmare. In 4 years, he racked up 726 demerits, a record that still stands. But underneath the chaos was a natural leader, bold, fearless, the kind of guy who got into trouble for refusing to sit still, but who, once war broke out, became exactly the kind of officer the Union Army needed. And boy, did he rise fast. Custer didn't just fight in the Civil War. He charged through it on horseback, with sabers swinging. He was promoted to general at 23, fought at Gettysburg, rode at Appomattox, was there when Lee surrendered. The press couldn't get enough of him. Neither could his soldiers. But once the war ended, peace felt like exile. And Custer? He wasn't done chasing history. While Custer was polishing his sabers and practicing dramatic hat flourishes, Sitting Bull was preparing for something far more serious: the survival of his people. Sitting Bull wasn't just a war chief. He was a holy man, a Hunkpapa Lakota leader whose authority came not from flash, but from faith. Where Custer was fire, Sitting Bull was earth, calm, focused, and very aware that the U.S. government was slowly squeezing the life out of the plains. By the late 1860s, the Lakota, Cheyenne, and other plains tribes had already endured decades of broken treaties, massacres, and encroaching settlers. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 was supposed to be a line in the sand. The U.S. agreed to leave the Black Hills to the Lakota, sacred ground, home to centuries of ceremony and spirit. In return, the tribes were to stay on reservations and end their resistance. Many signed. Sitting Bull did not. He believed, correctly, that the treaty wouldn't be honored, that once gold, railroads, or politics entered the picture, the promises would evaporate. And when Custer's 1874 expedition accidentally discovered gold in those hills, that prophecy kicked into high gear. The government tried to buy the land. Sitting Bull refused. He said, "I would rather die an Indian than live a white man." Washington, offended that a native man had opinions, took a more aggressive route. In November 1875, just before winter, it issued an ultimatum. All hostile tribes must report to their assigned reservations by January 31st, 1876, or else, let's pause for a moment. That gave them 2 months, in the middle of a brutal winter, to abandon their hunting grounds and relocate across frozen, barren plains. Horses starved, children froze. It wasn't a policy, it was a trap. And Sitting Bull knew it. Rather than yield, he sent out messengers. He called together the bands, the Oglala, the Miniconjou, the Brûlé, and beyond. Warriors, women, children, all were welcome. Among those who answered was Crazy Horse. Crazy Horse was young, fearless, and mysterious. He'd never been photographed, refused to wear a war bonnet, and was said to have visions of his death. He moved like a ghost on the battlefield and fought like thunder when he struck. He and Sitting Bull were different men, but they shared a goal: stop the invasion. Together, they began building something rare: unity. By the spring of 1876, thousands had joined them: Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho. A massive encampment moved across the plains, mobile but watchful, shadowed by scouts and fueled by prophecy. It was the largest native gathering the continent had seen in generations. Meanwhile, Washington was licking its lips. The war it wanted was now a technicality. These tribes, simply by existing outside their reservations, were hostile. General Alfred Terry was ordered to move. So were Generals Crook and Gibbon. The idea was to trap Sitting Bull's forces between 3 converging U.S. armies and crush them before summer's end. And who better to lead the Eastern Hammer Strike than America's favorite peacock, George Armstrong Custer? The glory wagon was rolling west, and it wasn't planning to stop. In 1874, Custer had already gotten a taste of the Black Hills and the attention that came with them. Officially, the expedition he led that summer was a routine scouting mission. Just a military reconnaissance to see if there was a good spot for a new fort. Nothing provocative, nothing political. Wink, wink. In reality, it was a gold hunt dressed up as a camping trip. Custer brought along 1,000 men, surveyors, geologists, 2 Gatling guns, and, most importantly, a handful of newspaper reporters and photographers. He posed for photos with game animals. He accidentally stumbled across gold flakes in the river, and the press ate it up. Within weeks, word got out. The Black Hills were rich, and the treaty that gave them to the Lakota suddenly treated more like a vague suggestion. Thousands of miners surged into the region, trampling across sacred land with picks, rifles, and manifest destiny in their saddlebags. The U.S. government could have stopped them. It didn't. President Ulysses S. Grant, caught between honoring a treaty and placating economic pressure, chose to do what most administrations did when gold was involved: look the other way. And when the Lakota and Cheyenne resisted, as anyone might when their homeland is invaded, they were declared the aggressors. By early 1876, the war was baked into the political pie. The military devised a 3-column campaign. General Crook would strike from the south, marching north from Wyoming. General Gibbon would come from the west, through Montana, and General Terry, with Custer under his command, would push in from the east. The plan was simple on paper: find the hostile camps, surround them, and eliminate all resistance. Cut them off like cattle in a corral. The native side wasn't standing still. Sitting Bull's vision of soldiers falling upside down from the sky spread like wildfire among the tribes. It wasn't just a dream, it was a call to arms. Warriors rallied in numbers the U.S. had never seen before. Entire bands migrated across the plains to join the growing resistance. Then, on June 17th, a thunderclap. General Crook, camped along the Rosebud River, thought he was safe. His men were relaxed. Cooking fires smoked lazily in the air. But Crazy Horse was watching and waiting. With around 1,500 warriors at his back, he did something most native commanders avoided. He attacked head-on. The battle lasted 6 hours. It wasn't a skirmish, it was a brawl. Wave after wave of mounted warriors darted in and out of rifle range. Americans fired blindly. Arrows rained from the hills. Crook's only lifeline came from his own native allies, Crow and Shoshone scouts, who bought him time to retreat. Crook lost 30 men and many more horses. But his real mistake wasn't tactical. It was strategic. He failed to send word north. No one told Terry. No one told Custer. As far as they knew, the plan was still on track. It wasn't. Meanwhile, Sitting Bull's coalition moved again. This time to a stretch of land along the Little Bighorn River. Thousands set up camp in the valley they called the Greasy Grass. And there, the prophecy would come true. Custer's scouts found the trail first. Wagon ruts, pony tracks, discarded camp remains, all pointing west. The signs were clear. A massive encampment had passed through. More bodies than anyone expected. Maybe thousands. Bloody Knife, Custer's Arikara scout, told him flat out, "This might be too big. Wait for reinforcements. Wait for Terry." Custer didn't wait. On June 24th, 1876, the 7th Cavalry camped just east of the Little Bighorn Valley. That night, a thunderstorm rolled through the hills. The men slept in wet saddles and soaked bedrolls. Lightning flashed over the ridges, illuminating a landscape about to become legend. At first light, Custer's scouts climbed a bluff and spotted smoke, cooking fires, morning rituals. This was no minor camp. It stretched for miles. But Custer saw only opportunity. He had about 700 men split into 12 companies. One stayed behind to guard the supplies. The rest were divided into 3 columns. Major Marcus Reno would take 3 companies and swing into the southern tip of the village. Captain Frederick Benteen would move further south to scout the terrain with another 3. Custer kept 5 companies and rode north to circle around and strike from the top. It looked brilliant on paper. In reality, it was a logistical nightmare built on bad maps, worse intel, and mutual contempt between the officers. By mid-afternoon on June 25th, Reno forded the river and began advancing toward the camp. It was quiet at first, eerily so. Then the first warriors appeared. Reno ordered his men to dismount and form a skirmish line. That's when things spiraled. The Lakota and Cheyenne were ready. Not just a handful, hundreds of them. Warriors poured out of the camp, armed with rifles, bows, and the fury of a people fighting for their future. Reno's men fired blindly, some missing entirely, others hitting civilians. Tents collapsed. Screams filled the air. And then came the counterattack. Sitting Bull had tried to prevent the bloodshed. He'd sent out 2 men to negotiate. Both were shot. He'd even tried to shield his people by standing between the village and the invaders. But when a bullet killed his favorite horse, something snapped. "They've shot my best horse," he said, climbing to his feet. "It is the same as if they shot me." Gall and Crazy Horse didn't need convincing. They struck Reno's flank like a thunderclap. Warriors on foot, warriors on horseback, from the hills, from the trees, from the riverbanks. Reno's line collapsed. In the chaos, Bloody Knife, the man who had warned Custer hours earlier, was shot in the back of the head. His blood sprayed across Reno's face, and the major snapped. "Every man for himself," he cried. It was a rout. Soldiers plunged into the river, abandoning rifles, gear, and wounded men. Some drowned. Others were picked off, trying to scramble up the opposite banks. Reno, half drunk and shaking, reached the bluffs and threw himself into a defensive position. Minutes later, Benteen arrived, late, confused, and greeted by total carnage. "Where is Custer?" he asked. No one had an answer. While Reno and Benteen clung to a dusty ridge with their battered survivors, George Custer was riding into immortality. And he didn't even know it yet. His 5 companies had pushed north, skirting the edges of the village, hoping to attack from behind. The plan was probably to capture non-combatants, women and children, and use them as leverage. That tactic had worked in earlier campaigns, but this wasn't a scattered winter camp. This was a mobile city, and it was ready. Custer crested a rise now known as Calhoun Hill. From there, he could see the enormity of the camp, teepees stretching for miles, shimmering in the late afternoon heat, smoke rising from cook fires, herds of horses grazing. It must have looked less like a target and more like a mistake. He scribbled a final message to Benteen. "Come on, big village, be quick, bring packs." He sent a rider. He didn't wait. Then, like he had so many times before, Custer waved his hat in the air and led his men down the hill. Toward what he thought was destiny. Toward what was, in truth, a trap. Down in the village, the dust hadn't even settled from Reno's retreat before new scouts shouted, "Another column, coming from the north!" Crazy Horse was already mounting up. Within minutes, hundreds of warriors turned and galloped toward Custer's approach. This time, there was no hesitation, no defensive delay. The Cheyenne and Lakota hit the Americans like a wall of thunder. Custer's column fractured immediately. Lieutenant James Calhoun, Custer's brother-in-law, took one flank and tried to hold a hilltop. Tom and Boston Custer, George's brothers, stayed near him. They tried to hold the line, but they were surrounded in minutes. No one came to help. Back on the bluffs, Benteen had received Custer's message, the one pleading for support. But instead of charging in, he stayed with Reno. Maybe he didn't believe the note. Maybe he thought Custer had already rushed to his death. Maybe he was just sick of cleaning up the general's messes. Whatever the reason, he stayed. And the guns to the north kept firing until they didn't. What happened in those last moments became legend. Some accounts say the soldiers ran out of ammunition. Others say they formed a tight circle and fought until the end. Native witnesses described the hilltop after the battle. Bodies strewn in heaps, horses shot, rifles snapped. And at the center, a man with long golden hair, the only one not mutilated. Sitting Bull later said, "Up there, where the last stand was made, the long hair stood like a sheaf of corn, with all the ears fallen around him." When Terry's column finally arrived on June 27th, it found what was left. 210 dead men, scalped, stripped, bloated in the sun. Custer's last stand wasn't just a battle. It was a myth in the making, carved in blood, wrapped in legend, and destined to echo for generations. But the story wasn't over yet. When the shooting finally stopped and the dust settled over the hills of the Little Bighorn, there was no victory celebration. Not really. The Lakota and Cheyenne had won, yes. But they knew what was coming next. This wasn't just a battle, it was a line in the sand. On June 27th, General Terry's column finally reached the battlefield. They expected to find Custer. They found silence. Then they found bodies. Over 200 men lay dead across the slopes. Horses, too. The grass was scorched, blood-streaked, and eerily still. Some of the bodies had been scalped, others mutilated, but not Custer's. He had 2 bullet wounds, one in the chest, one in the head. Theories still swirl over which killed him first. What's certain is that he died with his uniform on, his boots off, and history fast approaching. News traveled fast. On July 4th, 1876, the United States had celebrated its centennial. Fireworks, flags, and glowing speeches about progress. By July 6th, the headlines had turned, "Custer killed in massacre, entire command destroyed." The country was stunned. How could this happen? America was supposed to be unstoppable, the railroad nation, the industrial miracle, the future. And yet, a group of so-called savages had wiped out one of its most celebrated generals in a single afternoon. Finger-pointing followed like clockwork. Some blamed Custer, said he was reckless, arrogant, that he'd split his forces in the face of overwhelming numbers and ignored direct orders. Others turned on Benteen and Reno, especially Benteen, accusing them of cowardice and negligence for refusing to support Custer when the call came. Benteen defended himself for the rest of his life. Reno faced a court of inquiry and was technically cleared, but his reputation never recovered. He drank more, talked less, and died bitter and alone. Custer, though, he became legend, the boy general who fell with his men, the last cavalry hero. Paintings showed him surrounded, revolver in each hand, bullets flying, never surrendering. That image, stylized, romanticized, entirely made up, was the one that stuck. Schools were named after him, statues erected. His widow, Libby Custer, made sure of it. She spent the next 50 years turning her husband's memory into a brand, brave, noble, tragic, never wrong. But Sitting Bull knew the truth. He and Crazy Horse had pulled off something no one thought possible. They had beaten the United States military in open battle, not with better weapons, but with unity, knowledge of the land, and sheer determination to protect what was theirs. Their victory, however, was short-lived. The shock at Little Bighorn galvanized the U.S. government. Troop numbers surged, campaigns intensified. By the next year, Crazy Horse was dead. By 1881, Sitting Bull had surrendered. And by the end of the decade, the Black Hills were permanently in U.S. hands. The land was lost. But the story? That lived on. Custer's last stand became a symbol of arrogance, of defiance, of empire, of resistance. And Sitting Bull, the man who saw it coming in a vision, became a quiet monument to what America refused to understand until it was far too late. The boy went west, chasing glory. He found a grave instead,